Welcome back to another edition of Myth Badger videos. This time around we're going to build the universal joint. Now the universal joint is one of the more interesting gears to build just because it has a lot of parts that move, and they move in ways that we're not used to with some of the other gears. So there's a lot of alignment, there's issues, there's also a couple spots where we need to use some different parts because we want to more securely fasten everything down. So let's take a look at the parts we're going to need here. We obviously are going to have our build platform here. This time around, I'm going to be using a larger, wider gearbox here. This one is very noticeable because there's no sections without these holes. It's wider than the more traditional gearbox that I've used in some of the other videos. So we're going to need one of those. We are also going to need two drive shafts here. I'm going to use one 4-inch and I'm going to have one 3-inch drive shaft. And what's going to couple them together is the actual universal joint piece itself, which looks like this. It's kind of just this floppy gear that's connected in the center. Now, one of the problems with this particular gear is it does have set screws in here, so you need to be careful that you don't remove these too far. The other thing is high amounts of stress will break the pins that hold these together in the center, so you also want to be careful about that as well. This is one of those where if you try and over stress it, you're likely going to break that piece and then it becomes a useless part. So to go along with some of those, since I'm using some drive shafts, I am going to need some locking collars, but I've only got 3. You'll see why later. But I'm also keeping a bin of spare parts just in case I need to add something along the way. Now we're going to have 2 of these pieces. These are going to be our kind of our L-shaped gussets, and we're going to be using them to help hold some pieces down. We're also going to be using some pivot gusses, and you can see here it's got a slot. This is actually going to be critical for allowing this piece to move. I'm also going to be using a couple of 5-inch flat plate single row strips. They don't come this length. You would have to cut them down to that length if you have a jigsaw or a metal handsaw. That will work just fine for cutting those down. We also are going to need a couple of 3-hole spacers in here. We're only going to be using 3 at the moment, and I've got some rivets to go with them. Now I'm also going to be adding some of these. These are little nylon washers here, and those are going to be helping to smooth out some motion when we attach this all together. So I've got 2 of those, and then I've got a set of 4 bolts and cap nuts to attach this down to our base plate. Now let's look at these pieces. To help with keeping everything fastened, I'm going to need to use some nylock nuts here, which we haven't used a lot in our other builds, just because they're a little trickier. I shouldn't say trickier. They're a little tighter to fit onto the parts. However, the one nice thing about using these nylock nuts, which you'll notice there's no teeth, and the center has this kind of cream colored nylon that's in there, is that when you attach a bolt to this, you can get it nice and tight, and these hold really well for pieces that are moving. They're quite popular, I hear, in VEX competition teams for that reason. They don't loosen as easily as the kept nuts do. So I've got a collection of these. I've actually got 8 bolts and 8 of these nylon or nylock nuts that we're going to be using today. So the way this universal joint works is we're actually going to be creating a platform in which this little winch here, this universal joint piece, is actually going to be floating inside of it. So I need to attach this down first before I do anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick an arbitrary spot this way, but I'm going to kind of move it a little bit closer to here. I'm leaving a gap of 2 squares or 2 rows in between, and I'm just going to go ahead and tighten these bolts down. We're wanting that little bit of a gap, which is where we're going to be using the 4-inch drive shaft today, but we don't want it too close. I mean, there's nothing that prevents you from moving it 1 square away either, really. That's not going to hurt anything. I just happened to choose 2 for this one for what I'm doing. It's just how I've done it in the past. So let's get these tightened down. One more here. We want to get all 4 corners. I did say this is something that has some moving parts, and the way they move is a little bit different. So we really want to make sure that all of our pieces get properly anchored down for this build. So I'm just going to take that little extra step, as I usually do, to make sure the pieces are tight, because any unnecessary movement kind of hinders how this gear is going to work. So now that I've gotten this into place, I need to find my position for my 4-inch drive shaft. So I'm actually going to put this right in the middle here. I'm going to set it right there, which means I'm going to need a 3-hole spacer. And just so that I don't have to sit there and try to feed it through, feed the rivet in down here, I'm going to put the spacer. That's a bit easier to hold on the inside as I put the rivets into place. Okay, and then I'm going to get one on the opposing side as well. So right here, I don't have it perfectly positioned. It's kind of a little bit tricky to get that in there. So let's feed the rivet so I can see my opening there. Okay, now we've got that into place. Okay, so now that I have that there, I'm going to go ahead and feed my axle through and tighten down a locking collar on the other side. Now, for my locking collar, I need to leave some room because I'm going to end up attaching a handle to this. So I want to make sure the handle doesn't get in the way. So I need to have it about right here. So I knocked that off. So I need the locking collar right there. Let's hold that into place and tighten it down. There we go. Now I've got that where I want it. Okay, so I'm going to come around to the other side here. And this is where I'm going to begin attaching the universal joint. So the way this fits is each side has a piece that fits right onto that drive shaft. But it's also got a set screw. So I need to loosen that set screw a bit. And then once I've got it loosened enough, I'm feeding it on. And that's, you go a little bit more. There we go. And I'm just going to tighten that set screw into place. So now we see that universal joint is sitting here waiting for me to use it. Though that also reminds me, I missed a step here. I need a locking collar. And I need a locking collar so this thing doesn't slide out that way, which I forgot to do. So let's go ahead and add that locking collar into place so that way it holds, and then I can put this back on. Okay, so now that I've got that piece in place, now I need to build the bracket. I'm going to build a bracket that actually gets attached onto the side here. And to start with, for building that bracket, I'm going to use these pieces here first, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach 2 of these pieces like this to build a bracket. So that's where I'm going to start using some of these nylock nuts. So I'm going to build it like this. And you see I'm building the L shape. So the L shape's on the outside. And let's go ahead and attach the nylock nut here. And I'm not going to get it down as tight as it can be yet, because I want to make sure that I've positioned this all the way at the extreme end of this gap. So I'm going to tighten that down there. And then let's go ahead and attach another one. Oh, helps if I attach this piece too. So just kind of fumbling as I put that into place, and then a nylock nut. Now when you attach the nylock nut, you want the end that looks like it has the nylon to be sticking out. You want so you want to be able to see that nylon sticking out away from the bolt. So the flat edge, the opposite edge, is what you're actually going to attach directly to the metal. That's going to face the metal instead. You could feasibly put it backwards, but it makes it a little less effective. Okay, and I can see that my metal's a little bit bent here, so I'm just going to have to work with that as I attach this other piece. So, oh, why am I grabbing a rivet? Okay. So, nylock nut. And another one. And now I can, as I'm holding those tighten or spread apart, I can kind of tighten these down. And this is going to be our bracket here. And you'll notice I don't have it perfectly shaped. So I'm just going to kind of, while it's still a little loose, I'm going to get it so it's kind of a rough rectangle shape. I got that one a little too far out. So I'm going to need to loosen and then retighten that one down. So you kind of have to play around to get that in the right shape, but we want it to form kind of a rectangle shape on there, kind of like this. Because what's going to do is now we need to attach these pieces. Now, when attaching these pieces, I'm going to attach them directly to the side of this. And I'm going to actually use, I'm going to go one row in, and I'm going to measure the middle hole, and I'm going to attach this here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to attach this on the outside of the object, okay? And I'm going to get a bolt, and here's where it gets a little tricky. I'm also going to attach this here. So I'm going to run my bolt in through this hole, through that hole, and then I'm going to turn around and attach this. And I forgot something again. So there's a lot of little pieces here. I want one of these nylon washers first. So now I've got the nylon washer sitting on here. I run it through my L-shaped gusset. I'm going to run that through the hole on my gearbox, and then I'm going to use one of my angle gussets, and I want the angle gusset positioned like this. I want the slot facing out. Okay, and then once I have that all into place, I'm going to attach a nylock nut. And I'm looking a little more closer, and I'm realizing there's a slight problem. This bolt is not going to be long enough for what I need. So I am going to have to use a slightly longer bolt because the shortest one just barely fits through. And it's not enough to really make sure that it's secure with the nylock nut. So I get a slightly longer half-inch bolt instead of my shorter 1/8 inch bolts. And trying to spin that nylock nut on doesn't work so well. So I'm going to do it from this direction. And we're going to get that nice and just about as tight as we can. It's going to end up getting adjusted slightly as we go. And now what I'm running into is I can't get a good grip. It's now just spinning, so I'm going to use my normal wrench to help hold that into place so that I can tighten this down. Okay, so we want this to be able to move like this when it's all done. That's our overall goal on this motion. This, as I stated before, it's a little bit more of a complex build. There's a lot of little pieces, and there's a lot of pieces that we need to get so that they hold into place. So let's get another of my 3/8 bolts, and I'm realizing I've got a slight problem here with my build. This piece is sticking out too far. So I'm sticking out too far on this end, which means it's, yep, I can see where the problem is. I've got pieces here that are too long. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to dismantle this piece and take this off, and I'm just going to have to live with the fact that it's going to stick out and it looks a little unsightly, and I'm just going to have to move all these pieces back into place one hole further in. So lots of little details on here. I didn't even notice that when I grabbed the pieces. I want these metal pieces to be 5 holes long, and I grabbed 2 that were 6, and that's where the hiccup happened, because then I can't actually take that L-shaped gusset and attach it to the gearbox properly. So tiny details, things to be aware of so you don't make the same mistake that I did. Now this thing lines up. So I can go ahead and begin. I need the longer bolt. I need a nylon washer. and I'm going to feed that through here. And then I need my angle gusset and then another nylock nut, which I just dropped. Okay, so getting that into place. Okay, and now I can hold this. Once I get that on there, it's twisted just the wrong way for me. Okay, there we go. And now I can tighten down this piece better. Okay. Oops. I loosened it slightly when I was taking that wrench off. Okay, so tighten, pull that off, and now you can see this piece is tightened down. The angle gusset moves a little bit more on that one, which probably means that what I need to do is tighten this piece a little bit further. So that way it's a little less movement on there. Okay, so now we have that into place. Okay, now what's going to end up happening is this axle is going to be fed through this hole and attached to the universal joint like this. So I'm going to need to loosen the set screw so I can slot that into place and tighten it a bit. But I also want to make sure that I don't have that going on. So I am going to add a 3-hole spacer with a set of rivets from the underside so that way it helps to hold those pieces into place. And the only other piece I'm going to add is I'm going to add a locking collar. Now, when I take this locking collar, I do not want to slide it down as far as I can. And the reason why is because as the universal joint changes position, this piece kind of goes in and out. See, there it's sticking out a little bit more, but when I go down to here, it's actually coming in a bit. So I'm going to take the point at which it's lowest, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to just have a tiny little gap between the 3-hole spacer and the locking collar, so that way, as this moves up and it moves down, it doesn't get in the way of this working. Okay? So that leaves only one piece, our handle, and then this thing is done. So I'm going to attach the handle over here on the back side, and now you can see how this works. But the universal joint has the advantage of I can adjust this angle. I can adjust the angle at which this piece is sitting so that it actually has several different operational angles. So that is a complete universal joint. A little bit longer video to record, but there's also a lot of pieces to go with it, so that makes sense. Thank you for watching, and feel free to hit that subscribe button so you can keep up with all tutorials here at Myth Badger Videos.